Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, where will the Timberwolves rank in the NBA Power Rankings in 3 seasons? Which teams will they definitely be better than in 3 years? And which teams will they still be behind in the overall NBA Power Rankings? We're going to talk about that here on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by BetOnline. BetOnline has us covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Hopefully you had a fantastic week to this point, and a big thank you for those of you that make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. That, of course, includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves, and my account, which is at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. We're just a couple weeks away from training camp, and we're kind of in that spot where it's time to take a little bit of a step back. We've been looking at the roster in a couple of different ways. I talked on Wednesday about how Jalen Noel, I believe, will get I think I landed on at least one second place vote or greater for Sixth Man of the Year this year. I think that's a realistic thing that could happen. I broke that down on Wednesday. I want to take a step even further back, broader context of the Timberwolves roster and the future of this Timberwolves roster, and talk about future power rankings. And a huge hat tip to a Bleacher Report article that actually came out about a week ago. I believe Andy Bailey over at Bleacher Report does a really good job. And, a great follow on Twitter as well. He put out Bleacher Report NBA future rankings, projecting every team's next 3 years. And it basically turns into, this article is a future power rankings. Of course, ESPN does this. I forget where they had the Wolves ranked the last time they did this, but it's I don't think ESPN does a very good job of it. I think they're all over the map. I mean, before last season, the Wolves were still like in the bottom 10, and which was absurd, of course, with Ant and Cat and D'Lo, and obviously well before Rudy was on the team. But still, you could see that there was an improvement coming for this team, and ESPN lagged behind. I think Andy's are actually much better, even if they're more subjective than the ESPN one, which has this panel of quote unquote experts ranks the team's, market and cap situation and draft pick situation and arena, and like all this stuff to like rank the organization in the future power rankings deal. Bailey's seems pretty subjective, and he says as much in the intro to the article, which I'll read here in a second. But I actually think he did a really good job with the power ranking. So I want to get to where the Wolves are, but I want to key in on a couple of teams that the Wolves are ranked ahead of that surprised me, and certainly at least a couple of teams. Actually, I think 3 specific teams that are ranked ahead of the Wolves in this 3-year from now power ranking that I thought was wrong. I think the Wolves should rank higher than these 3 particular teams. So first, let's set up what the objective is here of this article. And Bailey, again, this is over at BleacherReport.com. He says, in this week's edition of the Power Rankings, we're going to sort teams by a combination of subjective factors, most of which will have an eye toward the future. Who will have the most regular and postseason success over the next 3 years? Who has the best young cores? Who will be at the top of the league at the end of the 3 years in question? Whose recent performance suggests future success? And which stars will find themselves on different teams at some point in the next 3 years? He says answers to those questions and more inform the order below. So he ranks them from number 30 all the way up to number 1. This is projecting the next 3 years. So basically 3 years from now, or I think more accurately, this isn't which teams are the best in 3 years. It's who has the best next 3 years, which is important. And I'll explain why. Well, actually, the best example is right here towards the bottom. Houston is number 28. I think they're going to be better than the 28th best team in the league in 3 years because of that, Jalen Green, because of Kevin Porter Jr., very likely. Alperen Sengun as well, Jabari Smith Jr. Like there's a lot to like there. I'd be really surprised if there were only 2 teams worse than them in 3 years. However, they're going to be bad this year. They're very likely going to be bad next year. So over the course of the next 3 years, ranking them 28th makes some sense. Charlotte's another example. They're 27th on this list. They have LaMelo Ball. He was a 20-year-old all-star this year. He's really good. Sitting here right now today, most folks would say he's better than Anthony Edwards, right? He won Rookie of the Year over Ant. He was an all-star this year. Ant wasn't. Ant's kind of 1 year behind in terms of that, that award progression, if you will. And LaMelo was better. All the advanced metrics would suggest he was better his first year. He was better his second year, although there were a lot more holes that came up, I think, especially the latter part of his second season. All that to say, he's a 20-year-old all-star. We're splitting hairs here. So to have them 27th was really surprising to me until you remember this is talking about the course of the next 3 years. This last season was very disappointing for Charlotte after the play-in appearance the year prior. And there was some expectations that this team would be better last year, and they disappointed. There's also not much around him, right? There's really nothing around LaMelo Ball in Charlotte. They haven't drafted well, and they haven't done anything in free agency or on the trade market to add anything to him, once he got to Charlotte. So that makes some sense. Now, I should point out this ranking was done before the Donovan Mitchell trade last weekend. So Cleveland and Utah are not ranked appropriately. Utah's 26, which is actually, you probably drop them to what, over the course of the next 3 years, probably last, maybe 29th or 28th, maybe ahead of Indiana and the Spurs, perhaps over the next 3 years. But Utah, at any rate, was 26th. I'm just going to pull out a couple of notables. Detroit's another one. They're 25th. Obviously, they've got Cade Cunningham. Sadiq Bey is a nice player. They've got Jaden Ivey now, too. So Killian Hayes, too. Like, there's a lot of talent there. They're just not going to be good this year. They're not going to be good next year, which is why they rank 25th. In 3 years, they may be a playoff team if Cade Cunningham is who we think he is. And they're going to rank a lot higher than 25th. Orlando, 24, I think is notable. The Thunder at 23 is interesting. I'd probably have them a little higher. The Kings at 21 feels a little bit high. Yes, I know they're better this year. The roster, De'Aaron Fox, great. They of course have Domantas Sabonis, and they'll be better this year. But is it sustainable over the course of the next few years? Portland at 20, the Lakers at 19. Wouldn't really know what to do with them. The Knicks at 18, the Bulls at 17. Those are all kind of like a little bit older teams that aren't, they're good, but they're not as good as they should be, and they're not necessarily going to get better over the next 3 years. So it's very tough to know what to do with them. The Pelicans, same thing because of Zion. He had Cleveland at 15. This is before the trade. Toronto at 14. And what I want to do next is talk about where the Wolves are. They're not at 13. I'm teasing this a little bit if you haven't seen the article, but they are. They're in the top 10. The Timberwolves are in the top 10 on this list. I want to talk about their specific ranking and the three teams ahead of them that shouldn't be. And then I'll also highlight the teams that were ranked behind the Wolves that surprised me that the Wolves were ahead of. So we're going to do all that here next on the show. First, so let's talk about our title sponsors from today's show. And that, of course, is our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week's games. If you watch Thursday nights, it wasn't really it kind of was a bloodbath, actually. The Bills beating the Rams, 31-10, I think was the final on the road. I think it's the second largest losing margin by a Super Bowl defending team in a season opening game, which feels a little obscure, but I think still notable. At any rate, there's time, of course, to get on betonline.net to look at Sunday's games. And then, of course, now NBA, there's still plenty of NBA stuff out there. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, of course, including MLB. We're in the home stretch for the Major League Baseball regular season, plus MMA, boxing, golf, now the start of both pro and college football. And very shortly here, NHL and NBA. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So in Bleacher Report's ranking of the next 3 years for NBA teams, the Timberwolves made it into the top 10. That was the cliffhanger. Well, they're at number 10. They're ranked 10th, just ahead of Brooklyn at 12, Atlanta at 13. I skipped over them. Miami at 11. Little surprised the Wolves were ahead of Miami, but I understand it. Of course, Miami thing is not leaning as much on Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry, but more on Bam Adebayo and I would say to a lesser extent Tyler Hero, although of course he just won Sixth Man of the Year. Miami, I think for them, it's more just about organizational sustainability. Whether or not Adebayo and Hero can carry the Lowry Butler Heat team that of course, they were a part of it. The Lowry and Butler led team that went to the conference finals a couple years ago into the next era of Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, Miami Heat. Not dominance, but and not better than competence, not quite dominance, right? The Heat are always good. They had one or two lottery seasons, I think, in between the LeBron teams and basically now the Jimmy Butler years. And Pat Riley knows what he's doing. So having them 11th makes a lot of sense. And just because of the organizational stability, I'm surprised that they were behind the Wolves. The Timberwolves are at 10th, and I'll actually use my gripe here on the write-up from A.D. Bailey. And again, I think this list is good. But Bailey writes 6 paragraphs about the Timberwolves. The first 4 are all about Rudy Gobert. Not a single mention of Karl-Anthony Towns or Anthony Edwards until paragraph 5 of 6. And all that's mentioned is it says Gobert in place as the defensive anchor throughout the next 3 years. The younger stars should be able to focus even more on offensive impact. That was already pretty high for Karl-Anthony Towns. He cites his stats, and Anthony Edwards cites his stats. That's it. The only mention of Towns and Edwards is that they scored a lot this year. And then it says the supporting cast includes D'Angelo Russell, who, of course, only has 1 year left on his deal. Kyle Anderson, who only signed, is only around for the next couple of years. And Jaden McDaniels, who, of course, if everything goes right, should be with the team for a lot longer. Then he says the star trio, meaning Gobert, Towns, and Edwards, should keep the Timberwolves in the playoff mix over the next 3 years. I don't necessarily disagree with the ranking of number 10. I just think it's really funny that you could argue Gobert is the best. Gobert is the best player on the team now in terms of his actual on-court impact. No, he's not the best offensive player, far from it, but he's so generationally great defensively and on the glass. I understand spending time talking about him, but he's also 30 now. And over the next 3 years, he's probably still going to be the best player on the team this year, but Cat maybe the year after that. And, 2-3 years from now, Ant could very easily be the best player on this team. And the reason why this Wolves team should be, a conference finals contender, a contender to be a Final Four team in the league over the next 2 to 3 years. Probably not this year. I think it's going to be incremental improvement. I think it's a second round team this year, maybe a conference finals team the following year. And hopefully in year, what would that be? Year 5 for Anthony Edwards and, into Karl-Anthony Towns supermax extension, that perhaps they could be a finals type team in 2 to 3 years. I just think it's really funny that there's no focus on Anthony Edwards here. He is the reason, and Towns obviously as well, but Ant is the one with the astronomical ceiling, the ceiling that it's almost like the ceiling that shall not be actually named, right? People have floated what this just insane ceiling for Anthony Edwards, but nobody really wants to say it. It really is sky's the limit for Ant. And nobody wants to put crazy expectations on him, but for what we've seen for Anthony Edwards, that doesn't seem to bother him at all. And if he turns into what people think he could turn into, then this 10 ranking is going to seem insanely low. I want to spend more time, though, focusing on some of the teams ahead of the Wolves that I just don't agree with. And I'll go in order from the teams ranked closest to the Wolves to the teams ranked, who I think is ranked far too high. Philadelphia's at 9, and I'm fine with that. Obviously, Embiid has been MVP runner-up now a couple of times, and Tyrese Maxey's nice, and I get that. Number 8 is the Clippers. I don't understand that. Makes no sense to me at all. Bailey even acknowledges in the article, in fact, the first sentence is, if there was any way to trust the long-term availability, of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, the Los Angeles Clippers would certainly be higher up this list. Yeah. Has anyone checked their ages? Also, the age, especially with Paul George, the age plus lack of availability cannot mean that this is the 8th best team over the next 3 years. I know that a ton of people are picking them to go to the finals. People are picking them to win the championship this year. And that, of course, is part of the next 3 years. And maybe if they get to the finals this year and are, fall apart the next 2 years, maybe this ranking, I guess, is still justified. But it's just a weird roster. The way that it all kind of fits together, these allegedly positionless guys. But, I think like John Wall and Reggie Jackson really those are guys that have always been a little bit overrated as volume type scorers. I think Zubats is probably a little underrated. But if Kawhi and or Paul George don't both stay healthy, this team just doesn't have enough juice to be more than a play-in type team like we saw last year. Of course, that's who the Wolves beat in the play-in game. So I don't see them at 8. If they're fully healthy, sure. But you can't assume that they're fully healthy. That has to be part of this equation. And you also have to consider the rest of the roster. And it's fine. Like there's a bunch of guys that are rotation guys on playoff teams, but I mean, that's kind of it. Like there's no other star power, young star power there at all. So this is a future ranking. I really struggle with that. The team right above them is the Phoenix Suns at 7. My initial reaction when I saw that was, it's a little high for Phoenix because, Chris Paul's, 37, I believe. But then I realized, well, hey, DeAndre Ayton obviously is back there after restricted free agency. And Mikal Bridges took a big jump. Devin Booker also took a big jump. I mean, a couple years ago, he wasn't even as good as Ant is now. But he took a massive jump, late 2 years ago, and then also very good throughout last year. So I buy them being 7. I like that. I think it makes a lot of sense. You take Chris Paul out of the equation, and theoretically, the Booker Ayton combo should be enough to keep them at 7. So I'm okay with that. Totally. I want to talk about the top 6 because there's 2 teams in the top 6 that should not be ranked as high as they are, and I think it's actually kind of crazy. So we're going to do that here next as we close the show out. Minnesota Timberwolves are number 10 on Bleacher Report. Andy Bailey's Bleacher Report future power rankings over the next 3 years. They're number 10. I disagreed with having number 9, the Sixers. I'm okay with. Number 8, the Clippers. I disagree with them being that high. I'm okay with the Suns at 7. Number 6 is the Dallas Mavericks. I don't know if anyone noticed this, but they got worse this offseason. Yes, Luka Doncic is fantastic. He's really, really good. But they lost Jalen Brunson. They just re-signed, I think it was just Thursday, re-signed Maxi Kleber, which is nice. Tim Hardaway Jr. back and healthy, great. Reggie Bullock's a nice player. Christian Wood, the acquisition, that's important, but he's at this moment not as big of an addition as Jalen Brunson is, a subtraction for this Mavs team. I think they had some good fortune last year in a lot of different ways. I don't know that the coaching situation is really as positive as it appeared to be last year, although I'll give credit where credit's due. It was better than I thought it would be, and there were a lot of the Mavs were better. 2 years ago, they were a big disappointment. Last year, they were surprising with how good they were, and I think truthfully they're somewhere in the middle. Doncic is amazing. Obviously, he's currently in the middle of being awesome in Eurobasket, and I think the fit with Christian Wood's going to be great. But it's kind of Luka and a lot of just guys like Spencer Dinwiddie's getting long in the tooth. Will he really be as good as he was a couple years ago? It's just Luka's not enough by himself. He's not, he's not peak LeBron. He's not peak Steph, right? I don't think Doncic and these completely complementary pieces, that's what they are. There's no second star there. Could Christian Wood be that? Maybe. Tim Hardaway Jr.'s, he's not. He's a good player. He's not a second star. They don't have that. And that will be an issue, right? The reason why Golden State's going to be so high up on this list, the reason why Golden State's been so successful is Steph is not only better than Luka has always, or I shouldn't say has always been. His peak was certainly higher than where Luka is now, and Luka is, of course, still improving. But he also had Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and, all these other guys that have come through Golden State that are star caliber and obviously for a time, Kevin Durant, star caliber players. Luka doesn't have that. So to have them 6th seems pretty crazy to me. It just doesn't feel like they should be ranked that high. The one that's even tougher for me to figure, just in terms of the ranking, I'm not saying they shouldn't be top 10, but all the way up at 5 is the Memphis Grizzlies. The reason why this is confusing to me is actually pretty similar to the Mavs conversation. Luka's amazing, but I think sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves with him. Ja Morant even more so. Ja Morant is really good. He took an absolute leap in year 3 this year, and he missed a bunch of time. He missed a month or whatever, 5 weeks. But take a half step back. Remember 12 months ago, Ja Morant, there was a ton of hype with him, obviously coming into the league as a sophomore, rightfully so. But Anthony Edwards' second year in the league this past season was better than Ja Morant's second year in the league 2 seasons ago, right? Ja's been in the league for a year longer than Ant. They were both great in their second year for what, their age and their experience that they've actually had to that point. But Ant's second year was better than Ja's. Ja took a massive jump in year 3. He was really, really good this year. I'm not denying that at all. And he deserved to be an all-star. If Ant makes that same leap, he's also got Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, who are both better than the next best player on the Memphis Grizzlies. Desmond Bane's fantastic. He's an outstanding three-point shooter. I love Brandon Clark. Yeah, Timberwolves fans all love Tyus Jones. Jaren Jackson Jr. is probably going to win a Defensive Player of the Year if he can figure out how to not foul so much and if he can stay healthy. Obviously, coming into this year, the injury issue that cropped up in the offseason is going to keep him off the floor until probably Christmas. I think Christmas, New Year's range is kind of the latest estimate. If healthy, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane are great sidekicks. Brandon Clark could be if his role expands. But I just don't see how Ja and a young, solid core is better than Ant, who this year could make that same Ja-like leap. I think a lot of people are projecting that. Plus, Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, two multiple-time All-Stars, multiple-time All-NBA players, and Gobert, a three-time Defensive Player of the Year. Who's Memphis's big three? Who's there with Ja? I mean, D'Anthony Melton is gone. Kyle Anderson's gone. I mean, neither one of those guys would have been part of a big three, but like Memphis's roster is not better now than it was before the offseason. And while Ja is better, is he actually long-term a better player than Anthony Edwards? I think the answer is no. I think Edwards is already better defensively. He's obviously bigger, and he's a better long-range shooter, more consistent long-range shooter. If he could finish like Ja at the rim, then it's over. There's no question that Ant is the better player, and Ant would probably be one of the best players in the league immediately at that point. But the logic there to me is flawed. I think the cart is before the horse with Ja Morant. He's fantastic this year. And really, I shouldn't be blaming this on Ja. It's because the rest of the roster isn't great, right? Ja can be 1A on obviously a very good playoff team. But the rest of that roster is not good enough to be ranked 5th in the NBA over the next 3 years and to have the Wolves 10th when the Wolves just simply have, I mean, you could argue D'Angelo Russell as the Timberwolves' 4th best player is just as good as anybody you'd want to consider the 2nd best player with the Grizzlies. I mean, Desmond Bane in a vacuum was more productive and efficient than D'Angelo Russell this year. I get that. But Bane also is he's got some limits to what he's able to do. As good as he is defensively and as good as he is as a three-point shooter, he can't be your second star necessarily certainly not on a championship caliber team. So I just think the number 5 ranking is a little bit presumptuous. Denver at number 4, I get that because Jokic is Jokic. So fine. I mean, again, the rest of the roster hasn't really gotten better. Obviously Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. coming back. I guess there's projection there that they're going to come back healthy and stay healthy. So I understand them at 4. Golden State at 3, of course, Milwaukee at 2, and Boston at 1. I think that's fine. I'd probably actually flip them. I'd probably put Milwaukee 1, Boston 2, maybe even put Golden State 2, Boston 3. But I understand Boston in the top 3 with, of course, the young trio of Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Robert Williams. So no real qualms there for me. I just think Memphis is too high at 5. I think Dallas is too high at 6. And I don't think I would have LA in the top 10 at all. They're the Clippers, of course. They're at 8. The Timberwolves are at 10. But a fun read, fun to consider. And perhaps as a podcast, we'll come back to at some point in the next 3 seasons. But go check it out at BleacherReport.com. Andy Bailey, wrote this, I believe August 30th is when it published, a little over a week ago. So go check that out. We're going to start next week here on the show. We're going to start some player previews. I'm going to do, depending on the player, I think there's some guys I won't do a whole show on, but we'll do some where I'll split, do 2 or 3 in a show. But I want to do some full show player previews for the primary rotation guys for the Wolves. I want to talk about what they did last year, whether it was with the Wolves or somewhere else, what I believe their role will be with the Wolves this season, and maybe a prediction or 2 for each player. A prediction at a reasonable level based on the player and the amount of playing time we can expect from them. So we're going to do that here over the next couple of weeks, and we're very close now to Media Day. Players are in town. If you're watching the Timberwolves social media channels, you know that a lot of guys have been in town for a lot of the summer, but there's even more guys in town now, and basically everyone's there scrimmaging, doing everything that they're doing. We're just a couple weeks away from Media Day, so get pumped. We're closing in on it, all coming together here for real. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Of course, Locked On Wolves is available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. And of course, thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Genuinely appreciate it. Definitely. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. So go ahead and follow. If you watch on YouTube, please subscribe, like the video, comment below. Having some video quality issues recently. We're looking to for ways to fix that here moving forward. So appreciate you sticking with us on YouTube. And of course, if you listen on Apple, a review would greatly help us out. So thank you for that. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. For your second listen today, go ahead and get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA, your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.